Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Hugh, and my role at Standard Life is heading up the propositions area. At the heart of my job is working with my many colleagues to deliver solutions to employers, trustees, advisors, and individuals that ultimately help people meet their financial goals, particularly in the run-up to retirement. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes or so talking about a subject that is really important to me: planning for retirement. Across those 15 minutes, I'll look to touch on a few different areas. Firstly, understanding the impact that 2020 has had on our many customers' attitudes to longer term savings, very much around how that landscape is shifting. Secondly, looking at the actions that employers can take, particularly to support employees that are nearing retirement age. And finally, taking into account some of the key considerations for employers wanting to support employees' longer-term financial well-being through 2021 and beyond. Next slide, please. So, now 6 years on from the announcement in the 2014 budget that fundamentally changed the landscape of pensions and retirement planning. At the outset of the introduction of pensions freedoms, Standard Life took an approach that remains consistent today and that we've increasingly seen adopted across the industry as a whole. In the midst of consumers reaching retirement, they are being met with more choice than ever before, so we look to support them by presenting them with some simple choices. These choices, however, have been become further complex with the arrival of COVID-19. Causing many customers to rethink retirement plans and potentially have to hold off retirement for longer or take their income in a different way to that which they planned. Those turning 55 this year are especially affected by this, with a very different decision to had they taken income the previous year and reached 55 then. And indeed, many of those that we expect to see turning 55 over the next few years may need to rethink or adjust their original pension plan choices. One of the choices we look to offer is through our core default fund. We think this is something really important for employers to go and consider within their overall pension scheme design. Ours comes at a number of risk levels, allowing the individual to dial up or down risk to suit their own attitudes, rather than having to consider an entire universe of funds. In addition to that, as they get closer to retirement, if they take no action, the solution will begin to de-risk in a way that should be suitable irrespective of their plans. This is really important as they get closer to retirement so that any market shocks don't affect them as much as it would have earlier. If they have a clear idea of what they will do, for instance, purchasing an annuity for a guaranteed income or taking their income more flexibly, they do have the option to shift into a different glide path that may be more appropriate for this outcome. As I mentioned, a really good default solution at the core of the pension scheme, we think, is something that all employers should consider. At the outset of pensions freedoms, many employers continue to have default funds that continue to target annuities. While we've seen a real shift away from this, we're aware that some continue to do this, and based on many of the behaviours we see with the majority of members targeting more flexible income patterns, we do think it's important that employers firstly consider whether their core default fund is appropriate for their members, and secondly, ensuring that there's a degree of choice that the member can take around the entire solution. Next slide, please. As individuals access their pot for the first time, one of the things that Standard Life looked to do at the beginning of pensions freedoms was introduce some new choice architecture. With this, we asked the customer a few simple questions, really looking to go and find out what is their intent over the next 5 years. Are they looking to buy an annuity, offering a guaranteed income that is, take all their pot, take a regular income going beyond that 5-year period, or are they looking just for some initial access and thereafter leave their pot largely as is, invested in the longer term? What we'll do with this information then is put them into an appropriate investment solution that targets the specific outcome that they've got indicated over that 5-year period. This concept has since been adopted by the FCA as part of their investment pathways legislation, which, despite a delay as a result of COVID-19 across the industry, is now looking to come in force in February. Given our early approach, however, we've got some real insight into what we've seen customers do in the last 5 years, which is particularly interesting. The vast majority continue to go and take their income either flexibly or indeed take their entire pot if they're able to do so. This has led to a lot of the design that I mentioned earlier in terms of default funds. However, the other thing that we've seen is that initial intent that a customer talks about of what they're planning to do over the next 5 years does not always come through with the actions that they continue to take thereafter. This probably isn't surprising. I think if I was asked what my plans are with some of my savings over a 5-year period, I wouldn't be sure. But what it does mean is it's very, very important to keep the customer engaged. That ongoing engagement strategy, highlighting inconsistency of behaviour, is very, very important. And the overall follow-up that it provides is absolutely vital to ensuring that a customer, your employees, get the best possible outcome in retirement. We've also, as I mentioned previously, collectively experienced COVID-19. We've seen a number of interesting themes come through this. Early on, there was a clear spike in customer demand to either reduce contributions or to stop them. This was mainly between the 16th and 23rd of March, which was consistent with falling stock markets and the UK government's decision to implement a national lockdown. When asking customers their reasoning for taking their money when completing the online retirement journey for the first time, we also saw some interesting stats come through. The number of customers looking to spend their retirement withdrawal for the first time was down in the 2019 trend, 36% in 2019 versus 31% in 2020. In addition to that, customers looking to live in their retirement was up in 2020 versus 2019. 19% in 2019 versus 25% in 2020. Finally, customers looking to save or invest was up in the 2019 trend, 17% in 2019 versus 19% in 2020. What we see here isn't a dramatic shift in some of the behaviours, but a bit of an evolution in terms of how we see customers begin to interact with their pension. The other thing we've seen come through with COVID-19 is a real shift in behaviours around digital adoption. Contributions being made via our mobile app was actually up 183% between the 26th of March and the 2nd of April. A really, really significant increase that we've seen there. Next slide there. So, if your employees are thinking about accessing their pension at 55, we have some tips to help them make the right choices for the pension alongside helping them with their financial well-being. Across industries, we are seeing an accelerating shift to a digital world. During the lockdown, we've adapted quickly to new ways of working with our colleagues, collaborating with teams, and new methods to engage with customers. We are seeing a streamlining of decision-making processes and the use of technology and data to increase responsiveness and planning. But this shift doesn't just apply to businesses. We've also seen an increase in online adoption by our customers. Digital tools and services that can support your employees make the right decisions for them are absolutely core to our overall offer. Digital can also help improve an employee's financial well-being by engaging properly through this. We believe that supporting members through education is one of the best ways to enhance their financial well-being, and this can come in through a variety of sources. Whilst many employers may have their wellness solutions in place, and many of them are full wellness solutions looking at fitness, mental, culture, and of course financial, Standard Life want to make sure that your employees are well informed and understand their options. We're increasingly shifting towards the sort of solutions we can do to begin to engage employees far earlier in their savings journey, not just talking to them about pensions, but about other relevant offers dependent on their stage in life. For instance, how can we help them save some money to either pay down debt, get on the housing ladder, or potentially save more into a pension? It's really about making it relevant for the individual. That is something that we continue to go and really focus on. Finally, I just wanted to touch on a few key takeaways. Next slide, please. We continue to focus on how we can engage through digital means and also utilise technological advancements to understand and engage your employees and our customers. However, while we do take that digital first approach, we do think a far more well-rounded engagement strategy is key. There isn't just one option around retirement, so support for your employees is absolutely key, and that's something that Standard Life is absolutely there on hand to help you with. Finally, financial wellness is no longer a buzzword. While it's something that has been talked about in the industry for a long time, it is increasingly becoming a real issue that employees need support with. And we believe that actually partnering both the employer and Standard Life together can absolutely help with the overall wellness offering and ultimately the longer term financial future of your employees. Thank you very much for listening to me today. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Well, many thanks for that, Neil. That was fantastic. And thanks very much for your thoughts today. We've got some questions, and it's great that we've got a bit of time to discuss some of these because there's some very interesting points coming through. Quite a lot of things around financial well-being and the relationship with COVID here, not surprising perhaps. One really great one here on how do we keep employees engaged in their pension when there are other more pressing and much more immediate concerns, particularly around job security, reductions in income, for example. What can we realistically ask employers to do, and what help can you give them?
Yeah, I'd probably start by saying it might be okay for them not to focus too much on their pension. So it's really going to depend on what their life stage is at this moment. And if there are more pressing financial concerns, they should absolutely focus on them at the moment. So, for instance, thinking of someone in their mid-20s that is perhaps really concerned about their job security, concerned about how they're going to continue to pay their mortgage or even just feed themselves, feed their family. Actually, looking at their pension probably isn't the most important thing for them at the moment. Actually, I think the real focus needs to be on financial planning in its widest sense, because actually there's a really interesting opportunity we've got at the moment just to get people a bit more engaged in their finances more generally, get that muscle a little bit more trained up and actually just get them used to taking those decisions. That can then later on, as it becomes more relevant for them, absolutely apply to their pension. For someone who is a bit closer to retirement, for me, again, it goes down to that concept of simple choices. So based on what's happened out there in the market, I wouldn't suggest that people begin to go and review their overall investment strategy and look at what stock markets have done. Actually, what they need to think about is fundamentally, have their circumstances changed, or does their current arrangement reflect their current circumstances? So if they've got an idea of what they're going to do with their money, if they've got an idea of when they're going to retire, giving that intent to their pension provider is the sort of simple step they should be taking. But overall, I think my guidance would be, really focus on what matters to you at the moment, focus on your financials, and actually, if they're looking after themselves, there will be time later on, as it's relevant to you, to properly engage in that pension.
Sure. No, that's great. Thanks very much, Neil. And another one, which I think is sort of COVID flavoured, but also a wider question perhaps. So we've looked at increases in adoption of digital tools too because of COVID, but do you think this is a profound now and a permanent shift? Or do you think it's just a trend and we'll fall back into pre-COVID ways as soon as we can?
I probably just see COVID as a bit more of an accelerant of what was an existing trend. So even miles before COVID, I say miles, Q4 2019 gave us quite an interesting stat. So for the first time ever, we had more logins via our mobile app than we did via the sort of core online dashboard we have. Now, actually, there were still less users using the mobile app rather than the core dashboard, but we were seeing a greater frequency with those engaging with the app. So that was the beginning of a trend there in terms of a sort of turning point. COVID has continued to accelerate that. So we've probably seen some people who wouldn't have interacted do so. We're continuing to see some people interact that as other means maybe become more available, we probably might see them stray back towards non-digital means. But I think for a lot of people, they've actually been amazed by the convenience of it, and it probably has just accelerated that trend that we were already beginning to see, that digital absolutely is the future of engagement, and it's certainly how we're prioritising a lot of our investments. So less around digital only, but certainly taking that digital first mentality and making sure it complements any other interaction methods that a customer may have.
Sure. No, that's great. And as I say, I think, as you say, I mean, it's COVID has been a really interesting tipping point, I think, for digital use. And I guess another question here, where we've got around the link between financial well-being and wellness offerings and broader, more holistic solutions. But what do you think are some of the key challenges to employers and also employees in offering financial alongside more broad solutions and to adopting those?
I think there's probably a few. So I think firstly, you've only got so much of a person's almost, I guess, time to take up. So where do you start? A lot of people are going to have a lot of different concerns. So you really need to go and make sure that actually when you are engaging them, you are doing it properly and making the most of that. I think really getting down to what is the sort of core requirement. So rather than just always leaping to a product solution, I think some really basic education, particularly around some of the earlier sort of good habits you can get into around your financials, budgeting, areas like that actually are a really core area that from a financial well-being can really actually help employees. Going beyond that though, I think we're seeing an increasing trend, particularly within what we're looking at in terms of ESG investing, but also how we apply that more widely. I think there's definitely something across society as a whole, and COVID has maybe accelerated this, that getting people understanding about the environment, around sustainability and some of the good work you can do there is a really interesting hook that you can get people engaged in a far wider number of potential initiatives that may help them. And lastly, I think that that there is a lot more that people are doing in terms of really understanding that sort of mental well-being and actually how that can impact in the other areas. So for me, it's about having a really joined up plan. It's about understanding you can't just chuck everything at people all at once, because you're not going to get them engaged with everything. But ultimately, it is really about understanding what is that core need that the person's actually looking for.
Sure, that's great. And we haven't got a lot of time left, but I very briefly wanted to follow up on a question we've had about sidecar savings. The ability to save, to create a sort of short-term safety net alongside a pension saving. So do you think these could take off now that people are thinking more short-term to get through, COVID-19? And we've got a very tiny amount of time, so just a brief thought on that, Neil, would be great.
A brief thought. I think there's definitely a role to play. I think one of the advantages with pension limits means that you can potentially defer some of your saving if that's the right thing to do. So if you've got some short-term saving goals, it may be worthwhile doing so. I think that probably the one thing to go and bear in mind is, if your employer has a generous matching structure in place, you may not be able to take advantage of that if you're not saving into the pension. So you really do need to go and understand that wider context.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil. That's been really insightful today. So next on our agenda today are live vendor presentations. So these are your chance to really get to grips with new products that are out there, new research and new thinking in the wellbeing space. So if you're already signed up for one of our live vendor presentations, do head over to my itinerary and join the presentation from there. And if you're still yet to sign up, just go and have a look at the agenda. We've got some really fantastic sessions and some really great insights in there today. So please do go and choose which session you'd like to attend next. So once again, a big thank you to Neil again today, and look forward to catching up with you later in the day. Thank you.